November 29th, 1943, 10:47 a.m. 24,000 feet over the industrial haze of Bremen, Germany. The air bites like 1,000 needles, thin and unforgiving, where every breath fogs the oxygen mask strapped to your face. Inside the B-17 flying fortress named Rikki Tikki Tavi, the roar of 4 Wright Cyclone engines drowns out everything but the crackle of the intercom. Staff Sergeant Eugene Moran, just 19 years old, a farm boy from the rolling fields of Wisconsin, hunkers down in the tail gunner's position. His gloved hands grip the twin .50 caliber Browning machine guns, eyes scanning the endless gray sky through the plexiglass turret. The cold seeps through his heated flight suit, but it's nothing compared to the dread knotting in his gut. This is his 12th mission with the 303rd Bomb Group, part of the 8th Air Force's relentless push to cripple the Nazi war machine. Below, the port city sprawls like a wounded beast, its shipyards and factories belching smoke that mixes with a flak burst blooming around the formation. You can almost feel it, the vibration of the bomber as it plows through the turbulence, the metallic tang of gun oil mixing with the sweat of 10 men crammed into this aluminum beast. Pilot Lieutenant William McDonald calls out over the intercom, his voice steady but edged with tension. Bandits at 3 o'clock high. Stay sharp, boys. Moran squints through the frost-rimed glass. There they are, Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt Bf 109s, sleek and deadly, swarming like hornets from the Luftwaffe's JG-1 fighter wing. The American formation, a tight box of 29 B-17s from the 1st Bombardment Wing, presses on toward the target. Bremen's U-boat yards, vital to Hitler's Atlantic wolf packs. But the flak is thickening now, black puffs erupting with concussive force, shredding the sky. Shrapnel pings off the fuselage like hail on a tin roof. Moran's heart pounds as he tracks a FW-190 banking in for a head-on pass. Here they come, yells the top turret gunner, Sergeant Harold Jenkins. Tracers streak past, orange fireflies in the daylight. Moran squeezes the triggers, rat-tat-tat-tat. The .50s buck in his hands, spitting lead at 1,200 rounds per minute. The recoil jars his shoulders, but he holds steady, watching his rounds chew into the enemy's wing. Smoke trails from the German fighter as it peels away, but there's no time to celebrate. Another wave dives in from below, cannons blazing. The B-17 shudders as 20mm shells rip through the starboard wing, fuel streaming like blood from a vein. We've taken hits. Engine 2's feathered. McDonald shouts. The bomber lags, dropping out of protective formation. Now they're a straggler, easy prey. Chaos erupts. Flak bursts closer, the plane bucking like a wild horse. Moran fires burst after burst, his world narrowing to the crosshairs and the incoming threats. A cannon round punches through the tail section, shattering glass and metal. Pain explodes in his arms. Shrapnel tears through flesh, blood soaking his sleeves. He grits his teeth, ignoring the burn, fingers still on the triggers. Up front, the cockpit turns to hell. Co-pilot Lieutenant Robert Hull is slumped over the controls, lifeless. Bombardier Sergeant Thomas Riley crumples as a shell detonates in the nose. One by one, the crew falls. Waist gunners, radio operator and navigator, 8 out of 10 gone in minutes. Their screams cut short over the intercom. The bomber groans, mortally wounded. Then, the unthinkable, a massive explosion amidships, where a 20mm round finds the oxygen tanks or perhaps the bomb bay. The fuselage buckles, metal screaming as it tears apart. In an instant, Rikki Tikki Tavi is bisected at 24,000 feet, like a knife slicing through butter. The forward section spirals away, carrying the remaining crew to their doom. Moran, trapped in the severed tail, feels the world tilt violently. Wind howls through the jagged break, papers and debris whipping around him like a tornado. He glances down, his parachute pack, stowed nearby, is riddled with holes, fabric spilling out uselessly. Blood drips from his wounds, freezing in the sub-zero air. Physics dictates the end. Terminal velocity approaching 120 miles per hour, 90 seconds until impact. He's a dead man falling. But Moran doesn't stop. Why would he? The farm boy who milked cows at dawn and fixed tractors by lantern light isn't wired to quit. German fighters circle the wreckage, closing in to confirm the kill. Tracers from his guns arc out wildly as the tail spins end over end. What drives a man to fight from a falling grave? The severed tail section tumbles wildly, and over end, a jagged aluminum coffin hurtling through the freezing sky. Wind screams through the gaping wound where the fuselage once joined, ripping at Moran's flight suit, tearing at the blood already freezing on his shredded sleeves. His twin .50s, still hot from the fight, jet out into the void. The altimeter in his mind races backward. 24,000, 23,000, 22,000 feet. Gravity pulls mercilessly, but something deeper refuses to yield. Moran, barely conscious through the pain, forces his wounded arms back to the grips. Shrapnel has torn muscle and bone. Every movement sends white-hot agony up his shoulders. Yet his fingers, numb, slick with blood, find the triggers again. Why? Training never covered this. Manual spoke of bailing out, of controlled descents, not fighting from a spinning wreck. But the farm boy who once stared down blizzards to feed cattle doesn't need a manual now. He needs defiance. A FW 190 banks and close. Too close. Its pilot curious, perhaps amused, expecting easy confirmation of a kill. Moran sees the blur of black crosses against gray wings. He swings the guns as best he can, the tail's rotation giving him erratic arcs. Short, ragged bursts spit out, tracers looping crazily through the sky like drunken fireflies. The German fighter jinks hard, startled, pulling away. Another 109 circles wider, hesitant. They had never seen this. A tail section plummeting, yet still spitting death. The Luftwaffe pilots break off, scattering like startled birds. One less threat, one more second bought. Inside the tumbling wreckage, time stretches and warps. The spin presses Moran against the bulkhead, blood rushing to his head, vision tunneling. His shattered ribs grind with every breath. He tastes copper, the shredded parachute pack flaps uselessly beside him. Canvas torn by the same cannon fire that ripped his arms. No bailout, no silk canopy, just the tail's damaged stabilizers fluttering like broken wings, slowing the fall just enough to stretch 90 seconds into something longer. Maybe 2 minutes. Maybe 3. He keeps firing in bursts when the rotation brings targets into view, not accurate shots. Physics won't allow precision, but enough noise, enough smoke, enough tracers to make the enemy think twice. You can almost feel the cold fury in his chest. This isn't over. Not yet. Not while there's breath and bullets left. The ground rushes up. Fields, forests, the gray ribbon of a road near Syke, south of Bremen. The tail yells violently as it drops below 10,000 feet. Wind howls louder, the structure groaning under stress. Moran's head slams against steel cables in the tail cone, once, twice, each impact blurring the world further. His skull cracks, bone gives way, darkness edges in, then the final plunge. The tail section hurtles toward a dense pine forest. Branches snap like gunfire as it carves through the canopy. One stabilizer stabs deep into a thick trunk, jerking the wreckage to a brutal halt. The open end slams earthward. The structure crumples. Moran is thrown forward, pinned in the wreckage amid twisted metal and splintered wood. Pain explodes everywhere. Ribs pulverized, arms useless, skull fractured with brain exposed to the freezing air. He blacks out. Silence falls over the forest, broken only by the crackle of settling debris and distant engines fading away. German soldiers, patrols scouring for downed airmen, hear the crash. They approach cautiously, weapons ready. What they find is a mangled tail section half buried in the undergrowth, and inside, impossibly, a young American tail, gonna still breathing. Barely. They drag him out. His body is a ruin. Compound fractures in both forearms, every rib broken, head wound gaping. No medic among them dares treat it properly. They bind him roughly and haul him away as a prisoner. The fight in the sky is over. The fight for survival has only just begun. But how does a man with his skull split open and brain laid bare live long enough to reach help? German boots crunch through the frost-crusted pine needles near Syke, south of Bremen. It's late afternoon, November 29, 1943. The patrol, Wehrmacht infantrymen detailed to round up down flyers, spots the mangled tail section first, a twisted heap of olive-drab aluminum wedged between shattered trunks, one stabilizer still jutting like a broken spear into the sky. Smoke curls lazily from scorch wiring. They approach with rifles raised, expecting corpses or perhaps a desperate survivor ready to fight. What they find stops them cold. Inside the crumpled wreckage, wedged against the ammunition boxes and control cables, lies a young American sergeant. Blood mats his flight helmet. A gaping wound on his skull exposes glistening brain tissue where bone has been sheared away. His arms hang at unnatural angles. Compound fractures, jagged bone and protruding through torn sleeves. Every rib seems crushed, shallow, ragged breaths fog the freezing air. Yet his chest rises, falls, rises again. Air let knock, one soldier mutters. He's still alive. They drag him out roughly. No stretcher, no gentleness. Moran doesn't resist. Consciousness flickers like a dying bulb. They bind his wrists with rough cord, pointless, given the state of his arms, and sling him between two men, carrying him through the woods like game. The journey to the nearest collection point is brutal. Jolts over roots, branches whipping his exposed wound. Pain registers in distant waves. Shock has mercifully dulled the edges. They deliver him to a makeshift aid station run by a Luftwaffe medical unit attached to a nearby flak battery. A harried German doctor examines him, shakes his head. Severe cranial trauma, multiple fractures, massive blood loss, probable internal injuries. Nick Lang, he says. Not long. They clean the head wound crudely, pouring sulfur powder into the exposed brain, wrapping in gauze, and stabilize what they can. No surgery here. He's just another POW low priority. But fate, or perhaps the stubborn Wisconsin grit, intervenes. Transferred to a proper POW hospital in the area, likely Dulag Luft or an affiliated style facility, Moran lands under the care of two Serbian doctors who are themselves prisoners of war. These men, trained surgeons captured earlier in the war, operating a dim, unheated war with scavenged instruments and whatever meager supplies the Germans allow. They clean the skull fracture meticulously, remove bone fragments, suture what tissue they can, and fight infection with limited antibiotics. No anesthesia beyond local. Moran drifts in and out of agony, biting on a rag. Why save an enemy? Perhaps humanity. Perhaps defiance against their own captors. Whatever the reason, they pull him back from the brink. Weeks blur into fevered haze. Infections rage. Fever spike to delirium. But the Serbian hands keep working. Slowly, impossibly, the brain swelling subsides. Bones begin to knit in crude alignment. Moran survives the acute phase. One of few who ever would after such trauma. By early 1944, he's stable enough for transport. Shipped by rail in a crowded boxcar, the Stalag Luft 6 in Hadekrug, now Siljut, Lithuania, then later shuffled between camps as the Eastern Front collapses. The real hell begins here. Solitary confinement for interrogation attempts, starvation rations that shrink a sturdy farm boy to skeletal frailty, endless cold that seeps into every fracture scar. Yet through it all, the memory of that spinning tail, the buck of the .50s, the refusal to quit, it anchors him. He clings to small rebellions, sharing a smuggled cigarette, whispering encouragement to fellow prisoners, refusing to break under beatings. 17 months stretch ahead. Camps in Prussia and Poland, a nightmare voyage on a hell ship across the Baltic crammed with dying men, and finally, in the brutal winter of 1945, a 600-mile forced march westward as the Allies close in. Feet wrapped in rags, frostbite blackening toes, guards shooting stragglers. Moran marches on, one tortured step at a time. Liberation comes April 26, 1945, near Bitterfeld, Germany. American troops find a column of walking ghosts. Medics stare in disbelief at the man who should have died for miles up. But the war ends. Eugene Moran returns home, scarred but breathing. He marries, fathers 9 children, lives quietly in Soldier's Grove, Wisconsin. He rarely speaks of it, only when the bottle loosens his tongue. Yet the story endures. One of only a handful to survive such a fall, perhaps the only tale going to keep firing all the way down. What drives a man to fight from inside his own grave, and then survive the grave itself? April 26, 1945. A muddy field near Bitterfeld, central Germany. The war is collapsing around the Third Reich, like a house of cards in a gale. American armored columns slice eastward. Russian artillery thunders from the other horizon. In the middle of this converging storm walks a column of ghosts. Several hundred Allied POWs, most of them airmen, herded westward on one of the last great forced marches of the European War. Eugene Moran is among them, 21 years old now but looking 40. His one sturdy frame is pared down to sinew and bone by 2 winters of near starvation. Frostbite has blackened several toes. He limps in rags wrapped around his feet. The skull wound from that November day in 1943 has healed into a puckered, hairless scar the size of a silver dollar. The bone beneath still tender to the slightest pressure. His arms, never properly set, hang at awkward angles, elbows stiff, fingers crooked. Every step jars old fractures. Yet he keeps moving. Falling behind means a bullet from one of the dwindling, increasingly jumpy German guards. The march has already claimed dozens. Men collapse from dysentery, pneumonia, sheer exhaustion. The guards shoot them where they fall or leave them for the wolves. Moran has seen friends, men he shared cigarettes and whispered escape plans with, simply stop walking one morning and never rise again. He keeps his eyes forward, counting footsteps the way he once counted rows in a cornfield back in Wisconsin. 1 foot, then the other. Breathe. Repeat. You can almost taste a metallic chill in the air, smell the wood smoke from distant villages burning, hear the low rumble of artillery that never quite stops. At night, the prisoners huddle in barns or ditches, sharing body heat, trading rumors. The Russians are close, the Americans closer. The war could end any day. Moran rarely speaks. When he does, it's quiet stories of home, milking cows before dawn, the smell of fresh hay, his mother's apple pie, small anchors against the madness. Then, on the 26th, it happens. American scouts crest a ridge. Jeeps and half-tracks grind to a halt. GIs spill out, rifles up, staring at the skeletal column in disbelief. A young lieutenant steps forward, voice cracking. "You boys okay? You're free." The guard drop their weapons, hands raised. Some vanish into the woods. Others stand frozen. The prisoners, Moran among them, simply stop walking. Some fall to their knees. Others weep silently. Moran stands motionless for a long moment, letting the reality sink in. No more marching. No more counting footsteps. Medics swarm. They cut away the filthy rags, examine the scars, the crooked limbs, the head wound that should have killed him years earlier. One corpsman shakes his head. "How the hell are you still standing, Sarge?" Moran manages a thin smile, the first real one in months. "Stubborn, I guess." Repatriation follows quickly. Hospital shipped to England, then a slow voyage home across the Atlantic. He arrives in New York Harbor in late May 1945, just as victory in Europe is declared. The Statue of Liberty slides past, torch raised, and for the first time since that tail section began its spin, tears come unbidden. Back in Wisconsin, life tries to resume. He marries his high school sweetheart, Betty. They build a house, raise 9 children, 4 boys, 5 girls. He works as a carpenter, then a mechanic, hands that once gripped .50 caliber triggers now turning wrenches and saws. The nightmares come, but he buries them deep. He rarely talks about Bremen. Only late at night, after a few beers with old flying buddies, does a fragment slip out. The spin, the tracers, the moment the tail hit the trees. In 1995, 52 years after the fall, the local VFW post inducts him into their Hall of Honor, a small ceremony. He stands at the podium, still tall, still quiet, and speaks for maybe 3 minutes. He thanks the Serbian doctors who saved his brain, the fellow prisoners who shared their last crust of bread, the medics who found him at Bitterfeld. He never mentions the guns, the spinning tail, the Luftwaffe pilots who scattered. Some things, he seems to believe, are better carried in silence. Eugene Moran lives until 2005. He dies at home in Soldiers Grove, surrounded by family, at the age of 81. One obituary calls him a quiet hero of the 8th Air Force. Another simply says, tail gunner, survived, And in the quiet archives of 303rd Bomb Group Association, in faded after-action reports in yellowed letters, the story waits, almost forgotten, yet impossible to erase. A farm boy who refused to stop shooting, even when the sky itself said he was already dead. What remains is the simplest, hardest truth of all. Sometimes survival isn't about luck. Sometimes it's about refusing, to the very last heartbeat, to let go